Okay, so we're continuing to look at this old film from 1969, what they want to produce, not what we want to become. And there's some lost knowledge in this film that I'm going to reveal about certain patterns and behaviors that most of us aren't aware of. So, because you may not be aware of these things, it might sound strange to you, and so it might be a little difficult to digest all this. So, it's going to take a little effort to listen to what I have to say because there's a pattern and you have to kind of follow along and kind of trace these certain details and facts in what you're about to see and experience. Okay, so it requires a little bit of patience, so try and bear with it. Okay, so this is part 2, and let's see how it continues.
The operation of the school today, it's more machine-like. It's very impersonal. Now, maybe the public may think that schools are democratic. They are democratic as far as the rights of the individual, but as far as the operation, they are not democratic.
Okay, so this guy's basically saying that the system, the education system, is very machine-like, okay? Now, whether he realizes it or not, he's revealing a certain truth about everything around him, okay? Not just the education system, but all sorts of organizations and institutions. They all have a structure to it, a machine-like operation where there is a specific order to it, okay? So even this film, for example, is very machine-like and there's an order to it. And everyone that views it has to follow along and trace a certain pattern, okay? So let's see what else he says.
Can you say some more about that?
Well, in order to get efficiency in a school system, there has to be a clear pattern.
Okay, he even says it right there. There has to be a clear pattern. I didn't even know he was going to say that. So it kind of re-emphasizes what I'm telling you about how there's an order and a type of behavior. Okay, so people reveal these things unknowingly, which re-emphasizes this surface to everything and allows us to get a deeper meaning of this underlying truth to stuff. Okay, so just bear with me while I try and interpret this, because I may use different words and languages to orientate a picture of what's going on.
Of operation, behavior, rules and regulations, then there's not time for a group of people to sit down and to thrash out a variety of ideas to come up with a clear-cut, efficient policy. So I mean that there has to be one individual who has been selected because of his training, because of his experience, because of his drive and know-how, that is put in charge. And within reason, then, his philosophy would be interpreted into a policy, which would be the policy of operation of that school.
Okay, so he's basically saying that there has to be one person. Now, whether he realizes it or not, he's speaking for everything, okay? So, in everything, there has to be one truth to it, something that allows everything to make sense, basically. Allow everything to have a continuation of, the reality of the situation of everything around it, okay? And this kind of gets channeled into all sorts of organizations, institutions, people. It occurs at every location, place, and time. So it happens like inside yourself and inside of everyone else. Okay, so it's a behavior, okay?
Now, I believe that that's basically how you get an efficient school.
Now, you're certainly a well-known educator in this area. Do you think that the way you run your school is unusual in this country, or is it fairly typical?
No, I would be inclined to think that probably I am a little tougher. I run a little closer, tighter organization. But it's the only kind of organization I know. It's the only kind I've ever run. My teachers stay with me and like the protection that I give them. And I do protect my teachers.
Okay, so he's also emphasizing that there's this sequence or series of identities. So he's referring to them as his teachers or his followers or whatever you want to call it. And those people are basically harmonizing with the same pattern that he exudes. Okay, so things that are alike or similar tend to gravitate towards each other because it reflects themselves and allows them to attain a deeper understanding of who they are. Most people don't understand who they are. Obviously, when you're born, you don't know much, and you kind of have to absorb it from everything around you. So when you see the same patterns that you're creating also being created by things around you, it gives you a continuation of what you believe you are. Okay, so let's see what else he has to say.
The young people adjust to it, 98% of them.
Okay, so he says the young people adjust to it, and they don't really have much of a choice because they haven't like really created a pattern for themselves. So whatever the pattern is around them, they kind of just allow it to get absorbed. Okay,
We turn out a product.
okay, so he's saying he turns out a product. So that, whether he's realizes it or not, it reflects his image and what he is doing, his line of work. His line of work is a product, the education system, okay? So he's turning all the students into teachers. He's instilling this pattern of behavior into them so that it returns him another sense of who he thinks he is, as this teacher or someone with a higher sense of responsibility, okay? So he wants all these untrained individuals to become more like him, basically. And all organizations are structured this way because it's a natural process that exists within everything, basically.
We pass examinations. We get jobs in industry, commercial and technical. You can't beat success.
Okay, you can't beat success. So that re-emphasizes the succession of things, the repetitiveness, the recreation or the passing down of the same system or whatever it is. Okay.
And I'm rather inclined to think that this has been a successful school. But it differs, I know. It differs.
Well, I wonder if it does. You may be tougher, but I wonder if basically your system is different from many schools, or is it fairly standard?
I think that our operation would be the wish of practically every administration in the province.
To what extent is it important that you can make school children fear you and your disciplinary measures in order to create a learning atmosphere?
Well, it's not the desire of a principal to have an atmosphere of fear, But yet there has to be someone strong. There has to be what you might call a figurehead that stands for something, that will impress upon everyone that if we do not follow regulations, there can be punishment. Now, to that extent, of course, there could be said to be some fear in the operation of a well-disciplined school.
Okay, so there's this question about fear and what arises when you have a strong leader and someone that instills order and control over people. And what he's saying is that it's important in everything to have that that sense of responsibility, to be able to see what's going on around you and be able to cope with it. Because if you don't, then there's like this fear that arises, this confusion that occurs. I'm not sure if I explained that well.
Notice today a situation where a boy with long hair was brought to the office. Could you tell us why and what happened to him?
Well, that young fella had not been doing his work in the classroom. He has been down before. He has been a little bit of a problem to the vice principals to get him to see what is expected of him as a student of this school. Now, his hair is not in keeping, not quite in keeping with the standards we'd set for our good young people. If he's in trouble, then he'd better present himself to me, appearing right, if he wants some sympathy from me, the head of this school, as to whether he can continue in a class where he has not been fulfilling his obligation.
All right, so he says, he mentioned sympathy. If someone wants sympathy from him, he has to present themselves to a standard that he can accept. Okay, so this points back to how there's a repetition or a succession or a passing down of a role, an order, a sense of responsibility, that sort of thing. And what he's saying is that if you aren't like me, then how can I relate with you? How can I give you a sense of sympathy or a feeling that you belong, right? So there may be students or bad actors or whatever you want to call them that act out of the line because they might have a sense of fear or a sense of confusion or not an understanding of who they are. And because of that, it kind of goes against the system that they've put themselves in. So it's a natural instinctive process or behavior that is inside us that allows us to kind of build up our sense of like who we are, okay, and what or where we're going and what we belong to and that sort of thing. There's a lot of different ways of interpreting it, a lot of different words and things like that. So, and there's also a lot of reasons why a person might be confused, because all these institutions, all these organizations are all kind of competing against each other to attain the younger generation and pull them into their system, their line of thinking, their line of whatever, and force them to use their type of language. Just the same way that I'm kind of revealing this film and the things that are happening unknowingly. I'm kind of creating this language and I'm passing it on to the viewers. And some viewers won't see it. They'll be put off by it, or they may not like how I'm explaining it. Maybe I'm not that good at stringing together my words, and so they may not be able to follow along or trace the meanings or the feelings that I'm expressing. So there's all different reasons why someone might feel afraid or nervous and fall out of line, okay? So, but no matter where they fall out, they always fall into something else, okay? And this guy's saying, if you want sympathy from me, you have to show me that we're similar in a way, and so that there's this thing passing between us, okay? I don't know. I'm getting a little confused because I'm trying to string together a lot of different things, and so try and bear with me here. Let's keep continuing.
Is there any possibility that he might have felt that his hairstyle was a part of his individual personality?
I suppose, though I doubt if he would think that far. I doubt if the young person would think that far.
Okay, so the interviewer was asking, maybe the young person has a sense that he's an individual and has an identity, okay? And this guy is saying, well, I doubt he's thinking that far. I doubt he has the experience to understand what he's doing and who he is. He doubts that he can recognize the patterns and understand that he's producing a product about himself, an idea about himself, okay?
If they were contrary to the standards set by a principle such as myself, I think it would be a matter of trying to obstruct rather than trying to express some hidden personality of the individual.
Okay, so he's under the mindset that their intention is to obstruct, to prevent him from seeing himself in the students, to prevent himself from passing on his way of being, to prevent him from basically surviving. Okay, it's that instinctive behavior that is within everything. Okay, so he thinks they're obstructing rather than trying to express themselves. But in a way, it's both of those things, okay? But for him, he sees it more as an obstruction based on his perspective, okay? Because he's more concerned with allowing his system to remain stable, and he's not too concerned with the expression of other people. He just wants the expression of his way to be instilled in others.
I don't think they'd think that far.
How do you know that when students do this, it's an effort to detract from the learning environment?
Well, it's rather strange, but those that get into trouble in our school and are sent to the vice principals are usually the ones that have attire that differs from the standard that we set. So I base it upon the fact that those that are getting into trouble seem to be the ones that are a little out of step with what we expect of our young people. Now remember, we're trying to make these students, when they leave us, employable. And we have to set a standard that when they go out to apply for a job, that the would-be employer is quick and eager to see that here is a sensible person from the standpoint of attire and an appearance.
So you find yourself applying a standard that's really set in the commercial world outside the school?
Yes, I would say so, yes.
Okay, so he's saying that he's taken this standard that has been developed outside in the world. And what he's trying to do is kind of replicate that inside the individuals, so that when they present themselves to the world, the various institutions or groups or companies or whatever can see or make a connection, make a relationship to those individuals because they have a similar way of acting, okay? It's that passing of role and that succession, that repetitiveness of the behavior, the pattern of everything around you. And things that have a different pattern won't harmonize. Instead, they'll create noise and make it difficult to build things and create structure and allow you to trace where you've been and get a sense that you are surviving and creating a continuation of yourself, okay? So let's continue.
Let's go back to the problem of authority again. It seems that increasingly young people at times not only don't accept authority but challenge the right of the older generation to have authority. Does this ever occur?
Yes, these are the boys with, I would say, a chip on their shoulders, that they think that they have rights. And I have had young people quote that my rights are such and such. Now, of course, in a school of any type, and particularly this one, you have a right to attend, a right to get an education. But that's a privilege, and you must not destroy that. You must live up to it.
Okay, so basically you have to like live up to your expectations that you have about yourself. Let's keep continuing so that we don't take too long.
How come you have no initiative?
I think it's the lack of excitement in my life. I can't really see myself proceeding in such a manner when I go into a job. And I'd like something more, something along the lines of what the past generation had. They had a war, they had a depression, some excitement.
How about older people who understand this? School teachers when you went to high school, or professors or administrators here, or parents? Do older people understand this, how you feel?
No. As I say, it's because they're of a different generation and didn't go through the same type of society we're going through right now.
Okay, so this guy is a little frustrated or confused. He doesn't have the drive or the sense that he wants to do anything because of the degeneration that he's in. This younger generation, it's of a different time from the previous generation, so it's from a different perspective. And let me just draw a little bit here. Okay, so we have this stick figure that's standing in the present moment right here, and we have the past and the future. And I drew this on a previous video, but it's worth drawing again. And he's looking back at the previous generation, and they're telling him to become like them, basically, okay? But he's also looking forward to seeing that things are different from them.
And it's quite logical. They wouldn't understand this. There's no reason why they should.
Okay, so these people in the back have no reason to understand the people in front of them, because these people in the back are passing forward a role from the past. Okay, so they're passing their sense of being forward. Okay, and it doesn't go the other way. It doesn't go this way. At least it doesn't seem that way because of the sense of time.
Well, if school isn't exciting to you, how come school's planned the way it is? What does school life revolve around, if not you and your excitement?
Our society, what our society wants, what they want to produce, not what we want to become.
Okay, so it says that, and what that means is the society, it's about what they want to produce, not what we want to become. Okay, so again, it's about passing the role, the behavior, the pattern forward. It's the product of themselves and what they're doing. And what they're doing is creating this pattern of behavior and this need for succession, a sense that they fit in or belong to something. And they're not too concerned with what all these people or future selves are because they haven't been controlled or defined or given a sense of pattern yet. It's all just random dots basically, okay? And as soon as the role, the behavior is instilled into these individuals over here, they get a sense of continuation of the past, okay? So this person in the present moment, this person that has a feeling of the past and future, they're seeing this take place. They're observing all these different ways of being in the past, all these different organizations and systems that basically are doing the same thing to them, trying to control who they are and trying to tell them what to do. And for them, it's these people in the past don't have control over this guy in the middle. It's up to this guy in the middle to decide for himself where he's going to go. Okay, so he's confused because there are things in the world that are instilling this pattern that is making him behave certain ways, but because they're all crossing each other and existing in the same reality, he is kind of getting pulled in different directions, and eventually he's going to figure out how to cope with it all, how to feel a sense of who he is, and then he'll kind of become more like everything else. It's kind of difficult to explain.
I suppose that's it.
How does that work inside the classroom? I mean, when it comes right down to what goes on in the lecture hall, how's it determined what they want you to learn?
Well, it's not really what you learn in the lecture hall. It's the whole idea of going to university to obtain a degree so you can make more money.
Okay, so it's saying like the whole idea is simply being in the system, right? In order to become more. It's kind of like these people of the past are collecting all these things in the future, and by gathering it up and building up this person, they attain more of themselves. They get more money, or whatever is another word for it.
And become a respectable citizen.
Okay, so they get more money, they become a respectable citizen. So like a citizen of the system, basically a another another coin or whatever. You could use all different words. It's just a way of like interpreting the same underlying pattern of, you know, something that is uncontrolled versus something that has order, and the translation that's occurring between them.
But that's all. Nothing more, I don't think.
The degree doesn't excite you for its own
No.
value.
If I wanted to learn, I'd learn by myself.
Okay, so if he wants to actually learn something, he'd learn by himself, because whether he realizes it or not, what he's saying is, when you learn, what you're really doing is you're learning about yourself. You're finding out who you are, okay? And in order to do that, you have to kind of stand alone and see what's different between you and everything else. And that's kind of what all the organizations and institutions do. They try and find what sets them apart from everything else. And that's kind of why they're creating these channels of work, these styles of acting, these ways of communicating, and things like that. They're all determined to learn about themselves, and unknowingly, as they do that, they have to reflect themselves against the world, and that shapes the world around them. So he realizes this, or is starting to, and he's starting to become what the system is doing, okay?
I'd read. I suppose I'd attend lectures, but not in an institution.
And right now, you're not too sure what kind of things you would like to learn about, is that right?
Yes, and I think that's the fault of the school system in general.
Why is that?
They cramp whatever style you might want to develop by having you learn what they say, learn what the school system puts before you.
Okay, so he's saying that they kind of prevent you from developing your own style, and instead they want you to learn what they tell you to learn. Okay, this is what this guy's observing about the system. Okay, and so what he wants to do, he wants to develop a style of his own, and he's seeing that everyone else, their way is telling him what to learn, okay? and he doesn't like being told what to learn. He wants to figure it out himself, okay? So he wants to form a sense of order to what he knows about himself, okay? He doesn't want to simply accept all the orders and formulations and things that the prior generation has developed. He wants to have the ability to create it for himself, and he doesn't understand how to do that yet because he doesn't see the similarities between him and everyone else that has already come and has passed along their sense of role and responsibility, the sense of succession, and how everything extends from the previous generation and the past and things like that. Okay, so he wants to create the patterns. He wants to instill the patterns in front of him. So he's unknowingly becoming part of the system. He's unknowingly having that instinctive desire to have his sense of being survive, his way of thinking, his way of acting, okay? All of this is going on without really realizing it, okay?
You think you had more style once? More drive once?
Yes. Not for long, though. It was just momentary.
Okay, so he is asked whether or not he had this sense of style, and unknowingly he reveals a certain truth about what style is. He said it was momentarily. It was only for a moment, okay? So what style is that present moment. It's what's happening right now, okay? It's that way of acting, this way of being, okay? And he lost that sense of being in like the future type of side to everything. Okay, the dots over on this side, this is like the potential, and then being in the middle is like connecting the potential to order and having a sense of like identity. So the style kind of exists between them, and it's only momentarily. So he's kind of forgetting about the moment that he's in right now and how to find relativity between the past and future, basically. That's kind of confusing, but anyways.
Momentarily.
And the things that I'm saying are also repetitive, so that's kind of why I'm struggling to explain it, because I don't want to just say it all in one way, because then that becomes another pattern that people generally don't want to fall into.
One of Neil's points about Summerhill is that you have to look after yourself, and it makes you independent, and you don't have to lean on anyone. So when you're in the outside world, you do know what to do, more enough, and it isn't isolated at all. We go home in the holidays, and then we know the outside world, and we can do everything for ourselves, even though we do have our parents. And I'm sure we will be able to when we're grown up.
Okay, so this segment basically is transition from the previous one where everything was very ordered, and what it's showing is it's trying to create a contrast between the order and the installation of a pattern, as opposed to allowing the kids the ability to express themselves and kind of create their own patterns and their own chaos, basically, because they're untrained, and by allowing to just play with the instruments and experiment, it allows them to find a sense of their self and their ability to control what they're doing and things like that.
Well, Summerhill, of course, this experiment, which has been going for many decades now in England, run by A.S. Neal, has had a powerful effect on us, and in fact, none of us have ever been there. It attests to how much I think Neal has been in tune with the really important aspects of humanity that have been crushed lately, and to the power of that book, which was written with such a light touch.
Bob, how come you and the others decided to start Everdale Place?
Well, it was frustration. We found that we could do certain things in our own classrooms, but the context that we were working in was just too frustrating. Parents, teachers, and administrators next. They're involved in the same thing that people are in every institution in society at the moment. That is, that bureaucracy after a while exists for itself, or exists for the purposes of those in power. So teachers here and there in classrooms, although they can do little things, can't do very much.
Okay, so he's saying that bureaucracy exists for itself, and it re-emphasizes what I'm talking about here, and how the self exists within everything, okay, between the past and future. The sense of who you are in relation to everything else. And the patterns are a reminder that you have this shared identity, this extension of everything around you, okay? And what you're doing is you're becoming controllable. You're having the ability to have this responsibility, okay?
They must look at the structure itself and try to do something there if they want to really be having any effect at all.
What's at stake here?
At stake is a more total approach to the whole problem. Because we, in a certain sense, have stepped outside the established system, not because we're opting out, but because we believe that at the moment, staying inside and making little changes is not effective.
Okay, so whether he realizes it or not, I know I say that a lot, but he is revealing certain truths about what he's observing, and that's natural. We all want to find a reality about ourselves so that we can, continue our sense that we are something, right? Okay, so he thinks that he's stepping out of the system because it doesn't serve himself to be within it. By making small changes within the system, it doesn't return to him a sense of who he is or who he wants to become, okay? So he doesn't want to align himself with the structures that are burdening him, okay? So he steps outside and goes his own way to formulate his own pattern, his own organization of knowledge about what he thinks he is, okay? And everyone's doing this, but he is just expressing it in this specific way that is important to him.
I'd like to hear your views of why educators do maintain the school system as it is. There's a great deal of talk that in a democracy, citizenry is trained through the school system. What kind of society are children being trained for? What kind of citizens are being developed in our schools today?
I think they're being developed to, in a North American context, to run the space program, to work for IBM and DuPont.
Okay, so he's seeing that all the organizations and institutions and things like that, they're all designed in such a way that it forces the participants to work towards satisfying the goals of those systems and organizations, right? So it doesn't serve the participants themselves. It serves the goals of that perspective, what they're looking for, basically. So some systems might be looking at space, other systems might be looking at the ocean, other organizations might be looking at behavior and how people think, other organizations might be looking at history and what's happened, and the participants of those systems are having patterns instilled in them that force them to serve that line of perspective, that way of traveling forwards, and what they decide to basically relate themselves with, okay? It's about relating yourself to what's happening outside of yourself. And he's seeing this, and he doesn't like it because for him it doesn't give him a sense or a feeling of who he actually is. He sees it as just a product of something in the past that is separate from him. He hasn't realized how to make the connection between himself and everything else. He doesn't see the space between it and the pattern or the enlightened reality of whatever. I don't know. Call it what you will, right? So let's see how he continues.
They're in Canada. They're being trained to work in the branch plants of those establishments.
Do you think current education is lacking in content, or is there really a lot of content underneath the talk of methods and acquiring skills?
I would maintain that the form of things is as significant, or in some ways at this stage for kids even more significant than the content, the lack of content, because the form of a school, which include admit slips and marching around from place to place and the whole system of rigidity, this is something you learn too. It's not just a method. It's an atmosphere. It's a form that you learn within. So I'd say that a serious understanding of what form and content should be for kids right now is totally lacking.
Okay, so he's talking about form versus content. And what he wants is the ability to create his own form, or at least give the students the ability to formulate for themselves an understanding of what they're doing with their content, okay? The content being what everything is around them, basically, and the form is how they find an order between all of it, how they recognize the patterns between everything. He may not understand this deeper sense to it. He might just be looking at the surface. It's difficult to say, but in our purposes, that's how I'm interpreting it, because relatively speaking, it's all basically the same ideas and same messages repeating themselves.
In the Department of Education.
What kind of citizens do they become?
Passive, frustrated, driven underground, or just quietist and accepting.
Okay, so he's saying when they're in the system, they become passive, or they just accept it without really understanding it. At least that's what he sees anyways.
Is there any chance that the school system in which almost all Canadian children get their education could change in the ways that you would like it to?
I'm not too optimistic at the moment about that. I think if it comes from anywhere, though, it will come from the greater ferment among the kids themselves right now. From my experience with the teachers, a great many of them are disaffected, but the desire to be professional is so great that at the moment I don't see them as a serious force for change.
He's saying that the desire to be professional. Now, think about that word professional. It's about professing something. It's about having a voice, about being able to say something, okay? And he's basically saying that the younger generation, they want to have a say in things. They want to have a feeling that they're passing along something about themselves. And so when they're in these systems, they are kind of being conditioned to believe that they belong, that they're part of a family or something like that, because otherwise, if they're not, they feel lonely, and everything questions who they are and kind of make them believe that they don't belong, or they aren't anything, or their personality isn't appropriate, and that sort of thing. So the desire to profess, the desire to explain what's happening and what they're experiencing, that's very desirable for someone that has no sense that they're connected to everything. Okay, so this profession is their instinctive nature to reach out and try and grasp stuff around them in order to gain a grip on their reality, to gain a grip on themselves and what they're doing. And what this guy is basically saying is that he doesn't let's see, he has a problem with it because he might not understand that this is occurring everywhere. So he's being selective in his observation, and he wants to see a different side to it. He's putting a wall up between him and the system, and in order to do that, he has to recreate that system within himself. Okay, so he's unknowingly becoming the system by opposing it and separating himself from it, because it's that system that reveals truth about stuff. And it's kind of difficult to explain, but hopefully that's making sense. It's something that the more you look at things, the more you relate different stuff together, the more it makes sense. So I'm trying to grab different characteristics and details that are occurring in the film and put it into a composition that you might understand via the words that I'm telling you. And in a way, I'm instilling the system in you. So for some of you, it might be difficult or tough to digest.
Parents are frustrated, but at the moment aren't very active in actually trying to change things. The approach of administration, who are talking about greater freedom, but at the moment I think they mean by that freedom directed to the same technological ends. It's the kids that in great, great numbers now feel cut off and alienated from their schools. But I should not be too hopeful that the kids, being young, can act politically, can have leaders. Whether anyone wants to help them make changes, I don't know.
It's a grade 1 classroom, 6 years old, and this is the period when they are free to tell about their experiences from the evening before or this morning on the way to school. and it's commonly termed news. And it's a give and take of ideas and conversation between the children without a teacher.
Is that all? No, and yeah, no, and you know, for Danny, you know, for boyfriend too, you know, you see, he couldn't ride a two-wheeler, you know, so he just went on the bike and he started driving, he started riding it, and he said, oh, first he said, how do you ride a two-wheeler? I said, I'll show you.
After the news period, we have what is termed an activity period. Now, this activity period can operate in many ways. One, it could be more directed by me in that I give them certain activities to choose. Or it could be the way it's going to be now, that each child was given an opportunity to choose one thing that he would like very much to do. They must think for themselves and use me just as a resource person if they're in trouble. And sometimes I will pull myself completely away from this, and this is their period, and they must find out for themselves.
Okay, so notice how she keeps re-emphasizing this importance to think for themselves, to find out for themselves. And what this is basically saying is that they have to find themselves in everything that they do. They have to make that connection. They have to find that relativity between themselves and everything else and see how there is a pattern there. And when they're confused, when they have trouble with it, then they can resort to a previous line of thinking, a different type of pattern, right? And in that way, it kind of allows them to find a balance between comparing themselves and their ability to choose versus everything else around them that has already been chosen.
You literally get down on the floor with the children and you work with them, not as someone on a pedestal, but you're right down there and they respect you and you respect them and they realize this. They, I hope, will become very happy adults, which I think our present school system misses. But it's the type of thing that has to grow from the teacher himself or herself. You cannot force a person to teach this way.
And I firmly believe there's no way you can force anyone to learn if they don't want to. It just can't be done. We can go through the motions, but with no success.
Okay, so this guy's saying that you can't really force learning. It only happens when the person wants to learn. And so what he's revealing is that it doesn't really matter what he does. The system remains the same. People will do what they want to do. They will want to create a succession of themselves and develop knowledge about themselves.
So you have a situation like this in this classroom of the older children in the school who have gone through almost 4 years of this process, and there is really no problem. Everybody is busy, engaged in learning, but learning something that they are interested in. Certainly it is directed and schooled a little by the teacher at times. But what is learning? This is another thing we don't understand. What is knowledge? What we want to know for the given time that we need to know it. And if we have that ability or develop that ability to obtain knowledge when we need it at a given time, then there's no problem. That's learning. Freedom within reason. Some people misinterpret the word freedom. The children are running up and down the halls and outside whenever they want. If they don't like the program in here, they go next door. But it's not that type of freedom. There are strings attached to it, of course. But freedom, certainly to what it was 10 years ago.
Okay, so he's under the impression that there's more freedom And I guess it depends how you look at what being free is. And for him, it's being allowed to make a decision, to make a choice, versus other institutions that force specific choices on you and make you follow a line of thinking. But, you know, this also is the same thing, just in a different form, right? And maybe he realizes that, maybe he doesn't.
No question about that. I think if you don't believe in this type of program, you can't succeed. In other words, I believe that children need freedom, that they all can't be the same. I think you have to have this philosophy as a background. You get some people who say they can't change. I think they can really, if they really want to. But again, it comes right back to you must believe in the philosophy or the ideas of what children are like, how they operate.
Okay, so he says you can't change unless you really want to, all right? Now, he's given these kids the ability to change, but the kids, do they really have that sense or desire to want to change? You know, in the other style of teaching, they're being forced to have the desire to change, and so that desire might be stronger, and so they might look more intently at who they are because there's a disconnect there. Whereas here, there's not much of a disconnect, so they don't really have a reason to change. They don't really have a reason to become more aware of their changes. So are they really learning more about themselves in relation to everything else, or are they just flowing through it, you know, in a different style, in a different way? And so unknowingly, this structure might appear different. It's still doing the same thing. It's still creating the same problems. It's still creating the same solutions too. And it feeds these teachers that have created this structure. It recreates their way of viewing and instilling it into the children. So it's just as bad, and it's also just as good. And it's adding to the confusion of the world, basically. It's another line of thinking to follow, another pattern, another way of behaving, another system, another structure, another succession of attaining a role. So it might look different based on the design, but the actual rules, the actual laws, you know, the strings attached to it, those always remain the same.
They do what they must do.
So that basically ends the film. Hopefully this has helped awaken you to some truths that are occurring, some a loss of knowledge, some secrets, mysteries, whatever you want to call it, ways of becoming enlightened. Leave some feedback if you find a relationship with this video and have similarities. You may have a feeling that you want to find relativity. Or if you've turned off, you've probably already turned away and are watching something else. You could leave some negative comments and force me to question myself and become invisible and that sort of thing, and find a different pattern. That's fine too. So anyways, that's it. That's all.